With the completion of our soffits, now was the moment we'd been waiting for. Time to add metal to the roof. I was lucky. One of my friends does roofing on the side. His knowledge probably saved us a couple days all by itself. We were sure glad for his experience. The first step is to line the first sheet of metal up perfectly with the edge of the building. If you get this one wrong, the rest of them are going to be terrible. Once that one's lined up, then we just start adding them a piece at a time. As you can see, this would have been a little easier if the shop didn't have a steep embankment on one side. Once you get a sheet of metal on the roof, then you put in just enough screws to hold it in place and then go to the next one. When you're moving big long metal sheets, you can't have too many people helping out. One wrong move and you'll fold one in half, and then you'll be in trouble. We made a crucial error here. Now we're moving metal from a different stack. In the process, we handed it up the wrong direction. So now our sheets are facing a different direction. We eventually corrected it, but one place we'll have to add a little bit of caulk just to cover our error. Handing up big long sheets of metal is difficult in the best of situations. What we did here is we had a rope attached to a set of vice grips with a big flat tip. We were able to clip those vice grips to the edge of the sheeting, and then Buddy was able to pull them up hand over hand. Once we hit a stopping point, then we went back and added screws according to the manufacturer's recommendation. There's a lot of screws in this roof. We got about 3/4 of a roof done in an afternoon. We didn't feel too bad about that. Now it's time for some crab. We like crab. And Dutch oven cooking. Can't beat that either. When you got a crew that'll work 14-hour days, you gotta keep them fed. We hit the roof early, trying to avoid sweltering heat and high winds. We finished the other side of the roof in about 2 hours. Here's a time lapse of us starting the other side of the roof. Rather than using scaffolding, we ended up using the skid steer. It was perfect. It moved way easier than the scaffolding. Basically, I'd stand on top, they'd hand it up to me, I'd clip the vice grips onto it, and my buddy would pull it up. Every so often, we'd just have to pull the skid steer forward, repeat the process. My son and another buddy had to head home by this point, so we were down to the bare minimum on staffing. The fact that this side of the building lot was flat made life a whole lot easier. One of the biggest surprises of the trip was when we measured the squareness of the roof. We were only off about a 1/16 of an inch over all 60 feet. My buddy the roofer said this was the most square roof he'd ever seen in his whole career. Not bad for a bunch of amateurs. Those pesky wind braces that I talked a lot about in the last video finally became useful. Before we put the metal on, we used them to square up the bays perfectly. They were actually really pretty square before we had to tighten any of the rods. We only had to move stuff about an inch to put it on center, which isn't too bad. Basically, the roof pretty much fell right into alignment. You'll definitely want to have those wind braces where you want them before you put the roof on though. If you start torquing that after you get the roof on, bad things could happen. The other thing this time-lapse doesn't show is about the hour that we spent putting all the screws into the roof according to the manufacturer's specifications. There was also a bunch of trim that we had to put on before the roof was finished. That went along the sides. I'll have a little bit more trim to put on once I get my siding on. The other thing I'll mention here is that the manufacturer provided some foam closures just to help the roof breathe a little better and to keep it from sweating. Both of the closures looked like they were designed for the ridge cap, and there were no instructions to the contrary with any of the materials. However, one set of the foam that was provided, the long flat strips about an inch wide, were supposed to go along the bottom of the eave, and then the other strips, which were shaped in the contours of the metal roof, were supposed to go along the ridge cap. We didn't do that, and so what we're going to end up doing is putting some vents in the eaves just to provide that airflow. Other than that, the assembly of the roof went fairly smoothly. Smoother than we could ask for, that's for sure. After about 3 hours of working on this side of the roof, we were ready for the last piece. That was pretty amazing. Because of our error, we actually were able to save a piece of sheeting. We cut the sheeting to size with just a regular grinder. I was terrible at it, but luckily I had a buddy that could cut a nice straight line. By this point in the day, it was starting to get toasty. We took a break for a while, then it was time to put the ridge cap on as the sun was going down. With the ridge cap in place, now was just time to clean everything up. I had to get scaffolding and such returned the next day. It's a lot easier to get things cleaned up when you have a lot of hands. I was surprised how quickly this went.
Do you hear that sound? That's the sound of my new roof, keeping everything dry. One of the best sounds in the world. Last night, about 10 o'clock, we finished it up. The final steps were to put the outside trim on, as well as the center ridge cap. We also put in place the columns that are going to form the end walls. That was no small challenge. There was not a lot of clearance between the top of the roof and where the end columns go. Lifting them up with the boom truck was a little hair raising, particularly these end two where I had to do it from inside the shelter without hitting anything too seriously. I won't say I didn't bump a couple of things, but didn't put any dents or bends or twists in anything. So, finished up last night about 10 o'clock. Last night when we went to bed, it was actually dark here. I think that's the first time. That's about 11:30. That was the first time on a work day that we've gone to bed that late. But this trip has been a success. The main objective was to get the roof on this structure so I'd have a nice dry place to work. And it's doing that very, very well. It's a beautiful thing.
There was one last thing I wanted to get done before I left. I wanted to get a little room built on our concrete pad where I could store all the stuff that I'd been storing in the cabin that wasn't too valuable. My dad and I got this hammered out in about 3 or 4 hours. Storage shack is done. It's, as its name implies, quite ghetto. But the main purpose is to keep a fair amount of moisture off. So basically, we line the walls with plastic and put boards around to keep the plastic from blowing away. And then we got a door, about 8 by 10, should keep our stuff dry. By the end of the trip, after working 12 to 14-hour days, everybody was pretty bushed. But I was well on the way to realizing the dream of my Alaska homestead.